Okay, can I welcome everyone? I see we've got 21 people who have joined us so far. We'll be live streaming if you want to tell your friends, if anybody is not able to log on to Zoom for whatever reason. We'll be live streaming and we'll put the details of where you can watch us live. Live on Facebook, there you go. We'll put in the chat where they can log in on Facebook to watch live. So we'll put that in the chat. Okay, so my name's Yvonne Witter, and we've been running a few of these Let's Talk events, and we had one last month which was very vibrant and with a lot of participants, and Dr. Yansie Rolston, whose brainchild the Menopause Project is, was inundated with people wanting part 2. And we had to really move fast to get part 2 organized. We had the last one at the end of March. We have some new guests and some of our regular speakers like Nicole Joseph-Chin, the breast esteem specialist, and so much more. She'll be joining us later. And Onika Henry, who was with us, the sexologist who was with us last week, will be joining us later. And we are really excited because we have some new guests tonight who I will introduce to you in a moment. So without further ado, I'm going to get Dr. Yansie Rolston to set the context for tonight, and then I'll introduce our guest speakers, and we'll get the ball rolling. And of course, do feel free to raise your hand, put your questions in the chat. Switch your camera on and let us know what questions you want to ask, because I'm sure you'll have some questions. And if you don't want to put your camera on, you can just write in the chat. But do engage. This is a two-way process. We're not here to lecture you on anything. We're here to share knowledge and information, and sometimes skills too. So brace yourself. And this is a conversation, not for the, how do you say? Not for the easily offended. Let's put it that way. You need to have an open mind. You need to be willing to learn, and you need to, even if you're not comfortable with things, you need to be open. There's always something to learn. We don't set out to offend anybody. This is not about offending anybody. It's about talking honestly about health, well-being, and that's it really. Okay, so Dr. Yansie Rolston, over to you.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Thanks everyone who's here for part 2. As Yvonne said, we've had a few of these before. They've all been entertaining, informative, and fun. You know, equally importantly, we want to have some fun. So just to set the scene, about 8 years ago, she found herself struggling with menopause symptoms in a society that had only just been beginning to open up and talk about it and to address some of those stigmas and taboos. But it was actually a space where there were lots of white faces and white voices who were somehow inadvertently whitewashing her experience and experience of people like her, that is, those with Black bodies. As a Black menopause woman, she belongs to 3 underrepresented minority groups. She's Black, she's a woman, she's aging, and she felt lost. In the midst of what she thought was early onset dementia, she went to her GP. He wasn't very helpful. He was a white man. So she read books, she watched videos, she researched academic papers online, but there was not much around about Black experiences of menopause. So what did she do? In desperation, she phoned her friends and she asked them, so what are your symptoms? How are you coping? What treatments are you taking? What supplements should I take? What exercises should I do? What food should I eat? Basically, she just wanted to know all the things that she could do to help herself. But she was still unsure of those options because, well, as a cancer survivor, her focus was on having optimum biological, psychological health and well-being. For her, it was really beyond just managing those hot flushes. It was more about how do you cope with those mood swings, How do you cope with those bouts of forgetfulness? How can she cope with the vaginal dryness and the tearing? How can she cope with accidentally weeing herself? She'd been doing pelvic floor exercises for about 40 years. That was a problem for her. So she delved deeper. She explored further. She traveled to places and spaces where there were people that looked like her, where there were bodies that actually looked like hers and responded like hers. So she went to the Caribbean, she went to Africa, she went to Black communities in America. She was amazed. They welcomed her. They shared their customs, they shared their rituals, shared their knowledge, their stories, and their wisdoms. And she discovered so many things. She discovered that waist beads was a thing that was used centuries ago for fertility, posture, spiritual wellness, sensuality, and enhanced femininity. She didn't know that. She also discovered that there were festivals dedicated to and worshiping vulvas and vaginas. She didn't know that. She also found out that in some countries, actually, the menopause is revered as a sort of rite of passage to eldership, wisdom, and those people were endeared. She didn't know that because she was here in the UK. And for the most part, menopause was spoken in white communities, but cloaked in shame and stigma in both white and Black communities. But she was passionate about sharing what she learned. She would speak openly about her experiences. She met up with some sister friends, and this is one of the spaces that evolved. That she is me. So why are we here today talking about intimacy and self-love? Apart from the fact that it's been great, it is all about connecting to, for me personally, my menopause experience, because it's about moving from one phase of life into another. So into my eldership years, where for me, I've had insecurities, I've had anxieties, but mostly it's been a time for me to do a lot of self-reflection. Self-love, it's powerful. And it's not just about being self-indulgent, self-absorbed, and being selfish. We have those words where we see care of self as negative, but self-love, for me, is about self-compassion. But we've been so culturally programmed to feel that anytime we say self, it's wrong. Listen, self-compassion is important. And in the same way that we encourage to have compassion for others, it's equally important that we have to have compassion for ourselves. And that includes intimate love. So intimacy starts with self, but there are different types of intimacy. Emotional intimacy, where, you're checking into your feelings. There's that intellectual intimacy. If you're like me, you read and read and read and read. There's the spiritual intimacy. So it's about believing in something bigger than yourself. The experimental intimacy, so trying out new things. Physical intimacy, being tender with yourself and others. Touch, hugs, affection. And sexual intimacy. And we know that there's going to be a hell of a lot of conversation around sexual intimacy in this space this evening. So thanks for being here, and I'll hand you right back over to Yvonne.
So thank you very much, Yansie, and thank you for sharing your story. The theme tonight, as Yansie said, the theme tonight is sexual relationships and intimacy. Our guests are professionals with the expertise to contribute to the conversation. So I'm going to open the floor, the virtual floor, so to speak, with Aneka Theolade, sorry. And she's a lifestyle coach and orgasm trainer. Her coaching style takes a pleasure-based approach to personal development, bringing the elements of what makes for great sex to every aspect of life. For her, pressure is taken off goal achievement and the focus placed on enjoying the journey to getting what you want. Her fundamental premise is that connection and enjoyment are the keys to fulfillment. What is the value of creating a career, realizing your financial goals, marrying someone you love, and raising a family if you aren't actually present to experience and enjoy them all? I think she makes a very good point. So without further ado, we'll introduce our first guest, Aneka, who will open the conversation. And we're talking about sexual relationships and intimacy.
Hello, hi. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me. It's good to be here. Would you like me to talk about that topic or?
Yeah, talk about your. What we'd like to know is what's your view on Yansie? We talked about the menopause and the impact of it, and on these events. Let's talk. We talk about the topics that nobody wants to talk about, the things that people think are private and not said. In some of our previous events, we found out that women hadn't looked at their own vagina. They said that they needed to, women in the 50s said they needed to go home for their husband to look at it to tell them what it looked like. I mean, I remember being astounded to hear that. Because someone who'd been looking at my vaggie, as I call it, or pum pum, since I was a kid, so I got a mirror and looked at it. So I was quite surprised. I had no idea. It's not something you have in general conversation over tea, is it? So, well, it should be, but yeah. So with that, we've our conversations have evolved, and we talk about things that people don't talk about. So I just wondered what your take would be in relation to sexual relationships and intimacy, and Black women being, speaking up and out about how they feel about sex and intimacy.
Okay. All right. So there's two things. All right. Thank you very much. So I guess my take on like sexual intimacy, and I guess we were talking about self-love, comes from a practice that I teach to individuals and couples called orgasmic meditation. And what orgasmic meditation, or OM, is a 15-minute partnered practice in which a woman, from here on, is known as a strokee, right, has the left-hand quadrant of her clitoris stroked by a partner, usually a man, but can also be a woman, for 15 minutes with no goal other than for both of them to tune in to the point of connection between them and sensation as it arises in their bodies, right? And this 15-minute practice gives almost like a visceral template of a particular angle of intimacy. So it's based on, it has its own container or construct that teaches like a perspective on intimacy. So that's the first bit. And so one of the first things that happens throughout the practice is that the strokee or woman guides her partner to what we call the point of the highest sensation. And she does this through a series of adjustments. So she'll feel into her body, like, where does she want his finger to move? Does she want more pressure, less pressure, a longer stroke, a shorter stroke? In short, she gets in touch with her desire, right? And she learns how to communicate that in a clean, clear way. The stroker does the same. He kind of tunes in, what's the most resonant stroke in this moment. It's only 15 minutes. It's not religious. It's we'll say it's almost like an urban hack, right? And so these two people, so he makes offers based on what he thinks is the resonant stroke. And they both discover that one of the keys to intimacy is sharing what you really want in a clean, clear, and generous way, right? That's one of the keys to intimacy. It's like we've been taught, conditioned very much so, to almost strategize or manipulate to get close to people. So we pretend to like things, or we do this, what we call a kind of trade. So I do for you and you do for me. There are all these kinds of habits that we've built into how we get close to people. And what orgasmic meditation does is kind of pull those down and give you a fresh way of doing it. That's really, is very exciting, very electric. There's so many layers to it. I mean, I guess another one that I want to give is around what I just mentioned, which is about the honesty of the practice. So you spoke, Yvonne, about women never looking at their own genitals. One of the things that we've discovered is that a lot of men, I mean, they've had sex with women all their lives, but they've never actually had the experience of just staring at the genitals, right? Which is one of the first aspects of whom, the stroker looks at the genitals, notices what's there, and mentions one or two value neutral things about the genitals. It's the first time for many men that they discover exactly where the clitoris is. But one of the big things that happens, because a lot of women have learned to fake during sex, right? It's like they either want it to end really quickly, or it's not working out. So it's just like you make a lot of noise and you go, ah. But when someone's looking at your genitals, you can't fake it. right? The clit gets engorged, it gets moist. And so it's like this new relationship with reality. You can't fake it. He's stroking. If he's not stroking in the place of high sensation, nothing's going to happen. And he's going to know. So you learn to start telling the truth about what feels good. And this is another key to intimacy, telling the truth, being honest. Instead of faking it in order to create connection, you start telling the truth to create connection. And that's electric. It gives men, for instance, the keys to what truly makes, women happy. And when it comes to the self-love piece, I love this, because for me as an own practitioner, I've learned to fall in love with myself through my own truth, through my own desire, through being authentic. And it helps that having an orgasm a day makes you pop. You look really good as well. So it's like, you look in the mirror and you're like, oh, I really love myself. I look great today. Like, you turn on, having an orgasm a day turns you on, and you seek your own pleasure. It's like the self-love is about prioritizing your own pleasure. So I know I said a lot, but I mean, that's kind of, it's summed up in a big nutshell.
No, I mean,
yeah.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, and what you say is absolutely true. I mean, if a man who's familiar will know what's going on because he's familiar with the woman, with the woman's body, and yes, of course, absolutely, we will respond accordingly. And you can't really fake it. There's a very interesting point you made. I've never heard anybody say that before, but you can't fake it, because he will know when it's engorged. He will know. He will see the juices. He will see everything that's going on.
Breathing changes, all of it.
Absolutely. And if you're a moaner, then you'll be moaning, won't you?
Yeah, exactly. So it's and funny enough, the more women own, the less noisy a lot of them are. Because the truth of being turned on is like it's a deep breathing, it's a flushing, it's a kind of getting into your body. It's very different to the kind of theatrics that we've been taught through pornography. So very different.
Absolutely, yeah. Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce, just open the floor. Any questions, put them in the chat for now, please. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anika. Obviously, we'll come back. You'll have a chance to come back and speak again. Akeera Peterkin is from the United States, and we're really pleased to have you with us tonight. And she's an inclusive and affirming clinician who is committed to helping clients cope with the challenges that often come with humanity, identity, and emotional / mental health. She specializes in working with individuals who have experienced trauma, distress, and/or adversity, as well as identity-related experiences. Akeera, so my question to you is the same. What's your view on sexual relationships and intimacy in relation to your work? What do you come across, and how do you work with it?
Hi, folks. Good afternoon from the U.S., and I understand it's evening over there to my European siblings. My name is Akeera, as Yvonne mentioned. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so I'm primarily a therapist, and I work with underrepresented populations in the U.S. So what I usually see in regards to my clients are not just, Black and brown clients, but queer identified folks too. And a lot of them holding different marginalized identities. And so when Yansie reached out to me, she wanted me to bring like a queer perspective to the conversation. Because I think a lot of times when we think about sex, we often think about heterosexual relationships. And a lot of times the conversation leaves out, queer identified folks. I myself am queer identified. I'm a gender fluid person, so I go by she and they. And I'm also a sapiosexual, which means I get turned on by intellectual conversations and intellectual, intimate interactions. So, in the LGBT community, like our sexuality is not just primarily on like bodies and anatomy. It's also about heart and humanity, and so it's not just primarily of how one looks, but it's also how one connects with demisexuals, for example, friendships, cultivating deep connections before you're able to have orgasmic pleasure and play with those that you're connected with. And so what I work with a lot with are couples who I work with individuals and couples who are, kink play, for example. So working with people who are into, non-traditional sexual foreplay. So that may look like involving bondage. It may look like opening up the relationships. It may look like you know, including porn in the play too. And so with that, it comes with a lot of things that includes more conversations to be had. So I'm often teaching folks how to open up those conversations in an honest way, how to set appropriate boundaries. I'm also working with trans-identified people who are, you know, uncomfortable in their bodies, right? And so there may be ways that they may not want to be touched. There may be parts of their bodies they don't want to be seen. And how do you engage in sexual interactions and intimacy while respecting one's bodies as well? Yansie mentioned that, you know, self-love is a fundamental part of intimacy. And what I always stress is, you know, queer identified folks disclosing our identities, or what is known as coming out, is fundamentally an act of self-love. Like, we're rejecting internalized homophobia, we're rejecting externalized homophobia or transphobia. And so it's a way of, you know, tuning into our own selves and our own needs, in order to then advocate for ourselves, not just with our families, but also with developing our chosen families. It's also with advocating for with our partners. So for example, my partner, I had to come out as gender fluid to her, right? And some of those conversations are often ongoing and ever changing, right? And so, you know, we're always having more conversations. We're trying to find ways to have safe sex when there's condoms not available to us. So we're doing DIY condoms, like cutting gloves for the trans folks who have trans penises, or we're cutting like the stereotypical male condom for women who can't find dental dams because it's not as readily available in stores. We're trying to figure out, we're putting condoms on dildos and also on strap-ons, right? So there are things that heterosexual couples don't have to consider that we're often having to consider in our love lives, and in our conversations with people that we're encountering too. So that's a little bit about what I do, and sex is always a part of conversations when you're talking about queer folks. We actually talk about that over cups of tea, because, you know, we learn that we can only learn from each other, since it's so marginalized to talk about queer sex, right? So we're always having conversations that, you know, the norm of heterosexual couples or people are not usually having conversations about. So I'll start there, and I'm more than happy to answer any specific questions about queer or trans sex.
Thank you very much. And I don't think I've met another sapiosexual. So and then having said that, we've had more in the chat, so we're like whooping in the chat saying that we're here. Yes, and I'm sexuality fluid, but yeah, that's really interesting what you're saying. It's glad that we have this perspective tonight, because in our past talks, sometimes some of our audience has felt that this topic, you know, that queers haven't been addressed, if you like, at all. So yeah, it's really great that you're here, and I hope there are people in participants that will put questions to you, or people who will just ask questions anyway, regardless. Is there anything in the chat anybody would like to ask anything at this point? If you do, put your hand up or just speak.
I've got a question that someone PM'd me, and it is about disability and sex, particularly for people with stroke victims or those with arthritis. And I wondered if Anika wanted to respond to that.
What was the question they were asking?
It was just generally to talk about
how they yeah.
Yes.
I suppose it would depend on how they're impacted by the stroke, isn't it? What parts of their bodies are impacted, because the stroke affects different people in different ways, isn't it? It'd be good if they could say more, but yeah, absolutely does. Anika.
Yeah, I'm thinking through that one, because I mean the practice is almost pretty accessible. I mean, it isn't done in a bed. It's always done in what we call a nest, which is, well, not always. So it's primarily done in what we call a nest. So that's like a yoga mat with a blanket, cushions, a zafu for the stroker to sit on. However, if there are sort of like physical limitations to actually like getting down the floor, we do have alternate positions, which you are, you know, you're taught those alternate positions when you learn OM itself. But we also encourage you to get like bigger zafus, or you can actually use a massage table, and so the stroker can stand. There are limitations, obviously. If your left hand doesn't move very well, then the practice may not be that accessible to you. Yeah, I mean, outside of that, I can't, because we have positions for pregnant women. We have positions for, as I said, people who have like back conditions, leg conditions. So there are at least 4 other positions that you can take to do the practice. But I haven't thought about it like across a wide, and I mean, it's in terms of, you can do it whether you suffer like learning disabilities or not. We've had a lot of people in community who come in with things like autism or highly functioning Asperger's, things like that. So it is a widely accessible practice, but yeah, I would probably need a bit more information on what the person means specifically. So thank you.
I mean, I can add to that just to say that there are adaptive aids for people, disabled people, to have sex, but it all depends on whether it is about penetrative sex, whether it is orgasm from the mind, tantric sex. But if it is about penetrative sex, there are disability aids, and you can actually get them through, I think it's Disability Aid UK, or I can find the actual website, but there are quite a significant number of adaptive aids for people who have mobility issues.
Can I actually add there? Thank you for that, Yansie, because I think the one thing that's probably very important for me to say is that when I use the word orgasm, I'm not talking about the peak of a sexual experience. And that's really important. So when we talk to you about, women who have never experienced, the peak of a sexual experience, would still be for you, because it's very much about your ability to give and receive pleasure. That's what we talk about when I use the word orgasm. That's what I mean. And so it's very much for people who, it's like subtle pleasure. Learning to tune into that very subtle touch and, experience pleasure at, the more subtle levels, that tingling in your toes, slowing down enough to feel the flush of your cheeks. That's the kind of orgasm. And so, it's perfect for women in menopause who may not feel, like sexually turned on, don't want the whole enchilada. This isn't about penetration at all. In fact, the stroker stays fully clothed while only the strokee gets undressed from the waist down. And so in that way, it's also accessible to people who, for whatever reason, feel disconnected from, like sexual intercourse, or feel that, the full sexual experience is out of their range right now in their lives.
Thank you for that. Aneka, what I would suggest also is that you put your contact details in the chat, because people might want to get in touch with you privately. One of the things we find here is that a lot of people make contact with our speakers privately. They're less inclined to speak up on the night. But they will, so what totally. we do, we encourage our guests to put their contact details in the chat, kind of repeatedly, or my wing person Nicole will post it repeatedly. Thank you so much for that. Very interesting. Thank you, Yansie. Yansie, is there anything you'd like to add at this point?
Just wanted to add on that same topic of disability and sex, because too often we have this misconception that disabled people don't indulge in sex. They do. If they're asexual, that's a different topic, but they do. There's this whole thought process that we don't see them as sexual beings, and therefore when we have conversations, we don't include them in those topics. We tend more to think of LGBTQIA+ because we understand that, but we forget that disabled people do have sex, and as Aneka mentioned, there are those with intellectual impairments, but there are some people who have actually severe physical impairments, and they enjoy a very fulfilling sex life. As I said, there are actually aids. You can use different types of cushions, different types of mattresses, but actually you can get sex aids that are made specifically for disabled people.
Yes, it's really important. And Brian Q stated also that, sex is not limited to penetration. And that came up as well. And it's like I said, people need to have more experiences of tantric sex, and like Aneka said, just dealing with sensations and warm fuzzy feelings. They're very, very satisfying. Are there any other questions at the minute?
Can I add to
Yes,
this
sure,
conversation?
Akeera, absolutely.
So a part of my role is I'm working with marginalized folks. So I do work with a lot of people with disabilities too. And what I think is essential is for a person to consider what their own needs and wants are, and what helps them feel pleasure. And so when I'm working with people with disabilities, it's also about maybe considering outside the box how to get orgasms going, right? So, a lot of people are doing oral sex, they're doing other ways of experiencing pleasure, right? And so I think that's the other thing, the power of touch sometimes can be helpful. And so they're able to still get their sexual needs met, but not necessarily through like what may look like stereotypical sexual play. I'm also finding a lot of individuals with disabilities, they love porn. And so sometimes they're watching porn with their partners, and they're able to kind of get some kind of orgasm watching people engage in play too. So it's important to think about what brings you pleasure and figure out how to communicate that to the person or the people that you're engaging in sexual interactions with.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Onika. Anything you want to add, Dr. Yansie?
No, I was just going to, as Akeera was saying that, I was just thinking back to when there was a program on Channel 4 with the disabled man who was, he was able to have a prostitute brought to his house for him to have sex. And there was a lot of debate in society about, part of it was to do whether it was ethically right and morally right to use a prostitute. But beside that, the fact that there were people who actually said they thought it was quite disgusting that a disabled man should want to, as they put it, subject a woman to his body, and we've got to get over these hang-ups we have about what is an ideal body, and who is deserving of love and affection and sex and warmth and touch. It still disturbs me. You can probably tell I'm stuttering now.
Yeah, body fascism is ugly on every level, and it really hinders people from loving themselves. But there's a whole industry built up around getting people to feel uncomfortable about who they are and how they are. Even as Black women, our own hair that grows from our skull, is problematic for people. How it can be, only I don't know. But do you know what I mean? So there are forces at work who are determined for women, especially, to feel uncomfortable about themselves. And disabled people and everybody else. So we have to keep pushing back against that. Yeah, absolutely. Did somebody wanted to say something? Nicole, any questions? We're very quiet tonight, aren't we?
Yeah, there's no questions in the chat. It's a few statements, but they've been expanded on already. So yeah, people are a bit quiet today.
Well, can I add something, Yvonne W?
Sure. Yeah.
Because you know, and a lot of other people hear me already know that I love giving homework. I gave homework last time, and I just wondered if anyone did their homework and anyone wanted to make a comment about it, because I am determined that people will be comfortable with their body parts. As Yvonne had said, we had this particular person who bluntly refuses to look at her vulva and her vagina. There was another person who, older than myself, said that she'd actually never seen her vulva and vagina. And when I gave the homework some months ago, one woman contacted me to say she didn't realize that though she was Black, the inside, her vagina area was pink. You know, so I've been saying to people, watch that show on television, Naked Attraction, and you will see that the vulvas come in different shapes and sizes and forms and colors. But look at your bodies, people. Just look, take the magnifying mirror, have a look, scrutinize, because if you don't know what it looks like, how can you tell the doctor, say, if something is wrong? Going from my own experience, you know, when I had to explain to the doctor, thank God I knew what it looked like, and I could say, you know, this is what isn't right, and that's different. Because as you age, it does change. Yes. You know, gray hair sprouts.
Yes. Well, yes, that was a real shock for me, because I had no gray on top, and even now I've only got about 5. And I remember looking down there as, you know, my regular check. I don't check so much as I got older, but when I was younger, I used to check a lot more often. And I remember going, you know, because what's going on down there? It was grey hair, wasn't it? So I got grey down there long before I got grey up top, which is quite interesting. And yeah. So that's people need to look. Women need to look. There's nothing wrong with looking. Honestly, there really isn't.
Absolutely, you've got to look. You've got to check it. You check your breast, because lumps and bumps happen. Yes. But you can get lumps and bumps there too. You can get cancers. You can get all sorts of things. It's so important to check it and to see that as you're moving through life, the different stages, that also changes. Your boobies may hang a bit, your vulva
or a lot,
or a lot. I was being polite. You know, the vulvas can hang a bit, and the skin thins. It can tear. It can be dry. But if we don't have the conversations, if we don't look at it and talk about it, you know, that's how we learn. When I say to people, do you know what it smells like? What? Why would I? But you got to know, because if the smell changes, you can then say something to the doctor.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I go so far sometimes as to say, do you know what it tastes like? Because some people pretend, no, but they will taste their other partners, whether it's male or females, sexual organs. You know, it's yours.
Indeed. Somebody has put in the chat, if you don't know your own body intimately, then how can a man explore your body and pleasure you? That's a good point, Janine. And I you know, this whole online dating nonsense, I was talking to this man, and I sort of intimated that I need to tell you, you know, how I like to be pleasured. And he said, you don't need to tell me anything. I said, you what? You don't need to tell me anything. I know, you think I never been with a woman before. I'm like, you never been with this woman. You have no idea how to pleasure me. It was mortified, but that was the end of that conversation. It's crazy. Let's see.
Yansie, I wanted to add on that though, because there are definitely a population out there that don't want to look at their genitals because it triggers a lot of dysphoria too, right? And so it's like, how do you be mindful of what your genitals look like for health reasons, but also keeping in mind that there's a lot of anxieties that will come up. There's a lot of people who avoid going to OBGYNs because it triggers reminding that they have female genitals, right? So it's that is something to consider, and I think that's something a lot of people are trying to navigate too. It's knowing that their bodies, but also being comfortable in their bodies.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
And particularly where people have been going through the sex changes, or people who are intersex and struggle with not just the acceptance, but post-surgery, what does it look like? And whether they're satisfied or not satisfied. But sometimes based on these false ideals that society places on what a perfect body should look like. You know, that whole, I don't think it still exists, but when people were putting the diamantes on their vulvas, the vajazzle, as it was called then, and that whole industry that went along, thank God for COVID, because I think it stopped it. But yes, that whole industry of this is what the body should look like. So you need to do the tightening and the pulling and the tucking and all the surgeries. Absolutely.
I kind of want to jump in. Like I felt it several times along the way, but I think one of the strongest places for me was, when Yansie shared about the disabled person and people being like sickened, and like how would, because it's, for me, I mean, I'm not going to compare myself on that level, but one of the things that my practice for orgasmic meditation really helped me do was like drop a lot of shame. I'm like a Black woman who grew up in the Caribbean. So I was born in the UK. I left here when I was about just before I turned 5. And I now have a word for it. I didn't have a word for it back then. This was like the early 80s. Colorism, and I got to Trinidad, and I found out that I was a dark brown girl. It wasn't something I actually knew here. It was something I discovered there. But the way that I discovered it at age 5 was another little girl saying to me, she sniffed into the air like this, and she was like, "What's that smell? What's that smell? Ew, it's you. It's the smell of shit. You're the color of shit. You're Black like shit." And then all the kids ran away screaming from me. And that was the beginning of the moment of this othering for me, this kind of, oh, there's something, it was the first time I knew something was wrong. And I mean, growing up, there I had men say to me, "Oh, you should be proud. You're the darkest woman that I've ever been out with." So you should be proud. So, I had this real sense of not being worthy of something. It wasn't, I wouldn't have said that I wasn't worthy of sex or anything like that, but coming to home, just having my partners stroke my genitals for no other reason but for pleasure, just to be there for us to connect, really was a game changer. I remember there was like one woman in particular, and it brought tears to my eyes, where I was just like, oh, I'm worthy of this level of pleasure. How do I know? Because it's happening. I'm here right now. It's like, it was just like very, very simple, but it was like, wow, it's like a whole bunch of stuff just, because all the time it was like, do I deserve it? Am I attractive? I was always aware of my scent in spaces. From the age of 5, I started to use lots of deodorant and perfume because of what that girl had said. And all of a sudden, it's like, none of that mattered. I am worthy of pleasure. And that's all there is. And it was the beginning of a beautiful journey of self-love, of self-acceptance, of allowing myself to be stroked, of asking people to stroke me. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. That's a powerful message that I think many people will resonate with, actually. Janine has said that aside from intimacy, knowing how your body changes when ovulation occurs is very good to know as well. Anybody want to speak to that point about ovulation? Trinidad's colorism is so distressing and predominant. Colorism is everywhere, Nicole, unfortunately. It's a huge legacy of colonialism. Yes, and it impacts on us. Nicole thinks it's worse in Trinidad than anywhere else, it seems. Okay, I don't know. I've never been to Trinidad, so I can't say. But yeah, but colorism is ugly on every level. Janine was saying, I also feel often people don't openly talk about pleasure, sex, or pleasing ourselves, which is all normal. Yes.
Someone actually just messaged me and said, please talk about masturbation.
Oh, right.
What they want me to talk about masturbation.
You've got a private hotline there, Yansie, as usual. Go on, baby. Do your thing.
Well, not really. I don't know what they want me to say.
Okay.
I mean, where is Onika when you need her?
Let me go to Aneka. Aneka. And then
Onika is coming into the room.
Yeah, and then to Akeera. And then to Akeera. Yes, on masturbation. So Anika first, and then Akeera.
Yvonne, I know you're just calling me to be controversial because
No.
I'm not anti-masturbation. However, I do promote sort of like, pleasure and connection. So it's slightly, different for me. I agree, like it's absolutely normal. And there's something that I always tell like the people that I serve, I guess, that you can't tickle yourself. So while I agree that, self-pleasuring is like a great thing and like learning your own anatomy, I think there is something really special in discovering what you like through someone else stroking your genitals really lightly. Because what you do for yourself is very different to what someone else will do for you. And what's interesting too is like you discover in masturbation what you really like, right? How about how you actually communicate that to someone else during sex? So like with what I teach, it's really about learning how to take what you've learned in masturbation sometimes, or, you know, when someone is stroking you, and learning how to communicate. Like, I want to be touched. You'd be surprised how difficult this is. I want to be touched to the left, like less than a quarter of an inch down, really lightly, with less, you know, less pressure, you know, a shorter stroke is very, very challenging. And so I really encourage people to do this in connection. It's great fun discovering what you like. And you can also take, you know, what you learn from masturbation into a practice of intimacy where you're learning to communicate it with someone else so you can have that pleasure with them. So yeah, that's what I have to say with that.
Well, you know, quite a few women in the chat are talking about, you know, if you don't have a partner, and if you're, you know, and we, you know, don't have the opportunity to ask somebody, and I think I can speak for myself. You know, there are a lot of things that can a lot of things probably we should resolve. But you know, you can go through a bad breakup and have blocks on dating for a while, and you know, and struggle to build new relationships and trust and all that kind of thing. So,
well, I think that's perhaps the most controversial. I would feel for myself in a space like this, because OM doesn't require that you know, that you need a partner in that way, right?
Oh,
so
I see what you mean.
Yeah, I'm part of a community, that's, you know, thousands of people deep, and you can't ask for an OM without anything else being on the menu. You don't even need to have a cup of tea.
Oh, I see. Yes.
So the person literally comes around and meditates with you for 15 minutes at a time, and they say goodbye, and you say goodbye, you know, same time next Tuesday. Yeah, so you can build it up with one partner. You can have multiple, you know, partners. The idea that it's a meditation, it's closer to meditation than it is to sex, because literally it is confined to a particular area of the genitals. It's 15 minutes long. Your stroker wears gloves. You know, it's always the same way. So there's a safety to it. Everyone learns that protocol. And so, yeah, I'd like to encourage that people kind of think of it slightly differently to what they're used to. So you don't need a husband, you don't need a boyfriend, but you do need someone who you begin to cultivate trust with and communication with, and that kind of thing. So, and
he becomes the
your partner. Yeah.
Your partner.
And you can have, I have multiple partners, right? So, and I'm married, but I mean, because it's closer to meditation than it is to sex. So, you know, and my husband's absolutely fine with that. I'm like, I'm going to go home with Michael, see you later, you know, and that's because of, the nature of the practice.
Does your husband have partners too?
Yes, he does. Yeah.
Okay, that's nice. Yeah. I think the women and myself and the women in the chat, we probably need to get together.
And women can do it with each other. That's another thing. Great point, Yvonne.
No, I would suggest that we get together and explore this, finding out partners or whatever. It's just a whole other universe is opening up to us. I think. I don't know. I'm just being.
There's some people who find it a bit clinical, you know, so for them, their self-pleasure, their masturbation is about what they want. They may have had experiences of sexual violations, and they may, even with tantric sex with someone else in similar meditation, they say that they find it quite clinical. But I see Onika Henry is in the space.
Yeah, as a sapiosexual, I think I'd find that incredibly difficult to just. I don't think I could. But anyway, look, different strokes for different folks, and I'm glad that we're able through this forum and through Let's Talk, we're able to introduce various methods for people to pleasure themselves and learn about new techniques, new strategies, and like I say, if you keep an open mind, you'll leave here with something for sure.
Can I add? Sorry,
yes, absolutely.
I just wanted to add. First of all, Anika, your practice sounds very phenomenal and unique in its own way. I also wanted to add for the people who do enjoy masturbation for themselves, right? Like, have fun with it, right? You can also, you know, people enjoy using different creams and different like pleasure sensations. I also find it really enjoyable when people do like sexting and phone sex, right? So like still having a feeling of someone on the other side allowing you to feel pleasure, but you're pleasuring yourself too. So definitely have some fun with it and not necessarily do the stereotypical way of masturbation, but bring toys, bring different creams and gels, whatever it is that's going to help you feel some pleasure too.
Thank you. Onika Henry is in the house. Thank you for coming, Onika. Our next guest is Nicole. I don't know if Nicole's here yet, but Onika, I'd like to introduce you to the room. And I'll just say that Onika was with us last time, and we all had a great deal of fun. And so Onika Henry lives on the island of Tobago. We were also jealous last time when we found out she lived on the island of Tobago, because we were on lockdown in this cold place, but it was cold last month. And she's a Wider University trained sexologist and qualified sex coach. And she has a BA in theatre arts and a minor in psychology. She uses this combination of specialities for the benefit of her clients who need to talk about sex and sex-related issues. And she does this in an environment that is healthy, fun, productive, and most of all, safe and non-judgmental. It's funny, Onika, because we knew you'd be a bit delayed today, so we welcome you. We really appreciate having you. We talked about this thing about judgment, being judgmental earlier, about bodies and disability, people with disabilities, and so on and so forth. So yeah, we've actually been exploring some of those issues, and our most recent, I'm not sure what time you joined, but our most recent conversation has been around self-pleasure, masturbation, and so as you know, the topic tonight again is sexual relationships and intimacy. And yeah, you can throw your hat in the ring there, Onika. Go for it.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you guys for having me again. It's always fun for me to be able to share on what I do. And I came in just as you guys were talking about masturbation and self-pleasure. And I'll share my views, my experience, my work, what I do when it comes to self-pleasure. So I'm also trained as a sexological body worker. So I've completed that curriculum. And that includes teaching people about things like what Anika was talking about, the practice. But when someone comes into me, especially as a single person who particularly is looking to explore their sexuality, understand their erotic energy, one of the first things that we do that's body-based is what we call genital mapping. And so with genital mapping, we're literally exploring the entire geography of the genitals, internal as well as external as well as internal. And we're exploring literally about 20 to 25 different strokes. And then each of those 25 different strokes are varied in terms of speed, friction, pressure, pattern, and angle. So you see that 25 has now been multiplied really by about 5. So there are many, many ways of exploring what your body how your body experiences pleasure. And then the next step after genital mapping, so that you understand what you like and what you don't like, we also give you the language to describe that. So how does that feel? What kind of sensation is that? So in addition to understanding it, we give you the language to explain, to describe what you're feeling, and to ask for what you want. And that is actually practiced during that genital mapping. And then we expand to pleasure mapping, where we include the entire body from scalp all the way down to the soles of your feet, using different strokes and also varying those strokes with speed, pressure, pattern, angles, etc. And so the entire body becomes a wonderland. And once again, we are practicing during that session, how are you describing what you're feeling. We give you the language so that you can now tell a partner. For those who don't have partners and who want to experience their sexual energy as a form of medicine, as a form of healing, that we do teach masturbation coaching. But a step up from that masturbation coaching is what we call having a mindful erotic practice. And this takes your masturbation and your solo pleasure to a whole different level. Because a mindful erotic practice can last anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour and a half. And it becomes, for a lot of people, part of their self-care that can also be a very spiritual experience. And so a mindful erotic practice involves an intention. What is my intention for my practice? What do I want out of this time with myself? You create a space. So are you going to put scented candles, or you have some kind of music thing in the background? So your intention plus your environment. And then on top of that, you wake up the body. And so stretches, you can do yoga stretches, you can dance, you can do body brushing, you can do a self-massage, a self-holding. And then there's a meditative practice. So that may involve breathing techniques, specific types of tantra or yoga or other techniques that you feel comfortable with. And then you actually get into genital touching. And then you savor after that. And then you may choose to journal. For some people, they include prayer. So depending on what you want out of your sexual experience, depending on what you want to do with your sexual energy, you can plan a mindful erotic practice that becomes a regular routine that is ritualistic, that is empowering, and that is healing for you. Because one of the things we do teach as well in sexological bodywork is how to locate that sexual energy in your pelvic area and use breathing, movement, and sound to move it through your entire body. And so you may decide, I'm going to take this sexual energy today and I'm going to breathe it into my heart because I need some healing for some emotional issues. Or I'm going to breathe it and move it into my knee because this freaking knee pain is killing me and I need to find some pleasure down there. So I move that sexual energy, that pleasure energy into where I may have pain and discomfort in my body. All right. I'm sharing that and offering that to you so that you think beyond just the basic, I need release, or I'm single and I want to have some pleasure, to thinking of your erotic and your sexual energy as medicine, as healing. So pleasure as medicine or sex as medicine. And so I'm just continuing based on what I ended up joining you at. So I hope that added something juicy and interesting to the conversation.
Most definitely you have. Thank you very much. So we're hotting up here, lots of food for thought. Okay, so I'm going to ask Aneka to explain. We've had lots of questions in the chat and privately. I'm going to ask Aneka to explain in a bit more detail and her role as a practitioner. Also, we had a question in the chat earlier asking if you have practitioners in Ghana. There's a few guests on here who now have relocated to Ghana. And so they're asking if this is there or not. So Aneka, there's a couple of questions there. One is the practice, is on practice in Ghana, if you know, and also a bit more detail about it and what your role is, and obviously share your contact details again when you've done so that people can contact you directly if they want more. So over to you, Aneka.
Thank you. I'll start with Ghana first. I'm not sure about Ghana. We are an international owned community, so it is like all over the world. And you tend to find pockets of people in places. It's easy enough to find out, but more than that, it's easy enough to create new practitioners. So it's like happy to train anyone, anywhere. I just recently trained someone in Trinidad where I grew up. And I mean, part of the whole thing for her was asking someone else if he was willing to learn it with her so they could practice. They're not a couple. He was down for it because of it being something that could help him get in touch with his more feminine side and slow down and begin to prioritize pleasure in his own life. And so he was a resounding yes to that. And so we have 2 new own practitioners in Trinidad, really easy. And so if there isn't anyone in Ghana, happy to train them. So there's that. Okay, so more than what I've said before about So I'll go back to the beginning. So as I said, it's a 15-minute partnered practice, right, in which a woman, who we will call the strokee, has the left-hand quadrant of her clitoris stroked for 15 minutes with no goal other than for either of them to stay tuned in, right, to the point of connection between them and sensation as it arises in the body. The left-hand quadrant, only because traditionally, like in the science books, that's where there's a concentration of nerves. The truth is, once you get to stroking, that spot is different places for different women, which is one of the nice things about the practice. There's a lot of variety, actually, right? You said something earlier, Yvonne, about the guy saying to you, oh, I've had sex with a woman before, and you're like, well, not me. Yeah, no two female genitals are the same. And so it's like where the rubber meets the road is when you're actually doing the practice. You might find that the spot is a bit more to the right or a bit lower, and the truth is the spot is always moving. So we won't get into that, but the rule of thumb is that you start on the left and then you move from there. What I'll say about Om, one of the first things that I like to share with people is what I shared earlier in the call, which is that redefining of orgasm, right? So one of the big things about Om is taking pressure off of that kind of goal-orientated way in which we usually like approach not just our sexuality, but just about everything in life, right? Like we're heading for the peak of the experience always. You know, you're studying for a degree and it's like, I want that degree, I want that degree. You get to the, you know, you finish the 3 or 4 years and you get to graduation and you don't even know where it all went because you were mostly not present in your body for it, right? Your focus was on graduation. And I mean, when that comes to sex, it's almost disastrous. Many women have discovered that they've been conditioned that way to sort of be very goal orientated, just because we have a more masculine society to begin with, right? And so it's like the focus is on climax. So Om teaches us how to slow down and tune into the more subtle sensations in the body. I teach 5 conditions for orgasm. So this is something, when we talk about Om, there's a template that comes from the practice that I take also into my coaching. So you can use this sort of take the pressure off the goal, learn how to tune into your desire and communicate it in a clean, clear way. Learn the tenets of connection, as in no longer faking it, being honest, being authentic about who you are and what you want in the moment. One of the big things for men is the way that they create variety in life, right? Like this idea that, well, if I'm only stroking one set of genitals for the rest of my life, I'm going to be bored. You know, the idea that, you know, variety comes in like slowing down and, you know, raising our level of attention. And so many facets to orgasmic meditation that at first, you could almost miss it, right? So in 15 minutes, there's a container. It starts off with asking someone to Om, which for many people, the first, second, third, and fourth time is very, very high sensation and it's very simple. Would you like to Om? And from there, you know, you build a nest. As I mentioned earlier, it's got a yoga mat, cushions, a blanket. The stroker wears gloves. He or she sits on a meditation cushion. Only the strokee undresses from the waist down. The stroker stays fully clothed. And then they start the practice. When they start the practice, the strokee gets into the nest, legs butterflied. The stroker sits over her fully clothed and then applies pressure to the inner thighs. That's the first point of connection. And then the stroker notices 1 or 2 value neutral things about the genitals. As you guys have mentioned, for many women, this is the first time they've seen their genitals through someone else's eyes. Seeing it through someone else's eyes is interesting. You mentioned earlier something about gray hair. I clench every time. It was like, you've got a line of gray hair on the edge of your inner labia, or, you know, there's moisture. It gets me every time, but it's really interesting to see it through someone else's eyes. Then he puts his gloves on and puts he or she rather, because you can Om with a woman as well, and puts his or her hands into position, which is pretty much very likely at the entrance to the introitus. The left hand is the stroking hand, and the only one in touch with the genitals really is the left index finger. And from there, with gloved hands, proceeds to stroke the clit very gently for 15 minutes. We say no lighter than the way you would rub your eyelid. And it's a series of up and down strokes with a particular lubricant, oil-based lubricant, so it doesn't run out in that 15 minutes. There's a timer. And the strokee and the stroker in communication discover together the point of the highest sensation. It starts with downstrokes, it ends with downstrokes, and it's always the same. So people learn through the container this kind of consistency that really begins to soothe the nervous system. There was something someone said earlier. I was someone who was raped at the age of 18. One of the things that Om gave back to me was a love for men, if I'm honest, right? And where that came from was simply because the practice is so simple. It's nothing extra. It's not sex. You don't get to ask me for sex after. As I said earlier, you don't even need to have a cup of tea. And so this kind of recognizing that there were men sensitive enough to enjoy a practice where they were only tuning into the subtle sensations, right? And they were available for that, for the sensitivity of that, to listen to my, to my adjustments. Because if, as the strokee, all the adjustments I make, they have to do it. but the stroker, all the offers I can say yes or no to. So there's a power given to the feminine that's unusual, in the practice. And so it really gave me back this relationship with men that I so value. What else do I want to say about that? And so, there is the consistency of the practice with the container. You know that it's always going to be done in 15 minutes. When the timer goes, regardless of what's happened, even if you are in the middle of climax, he stops stroking, applies grounding pressure, and then you share at the end. This is one of the most beautiful bits. You share frames. I heard somebody talk about learning how to communicate what's going on in the body. Frames in a norm is about sharing with your partner something you felt at the level of sensation in your body. And so at the end, both of you share, there was a moment when I felt a bolt of electricity from the tip of my clit up my tummy. There was a moment when I felt moisture and heat radiating from my introitus. Sometimes the stroker will say there's a moment when I felt a tightening in my scrotum. But what's really interesting sometimes, especially as you begin to practice with the same people over and over, is that sometimes you experience similar sensations at the same time. And so you discover that we are all limbically connected, and you begin to develop this limbic connection through practice. And so I don't know if that's quite a lot. I'd like to kind of leave it there, but and so yes, I teach this practice and I also coach around this practice. So you can bring all of the lessons from this practice to the different areas of your life and learn how to experience satisfaction and connection in exactly the same way. Yeah, and I'm happy to talk to anybody for 70 minutes for free if you want to learn about it. I'm passionate about it. It's my pleasure activism. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That really does explain it. I mean, I have to say, I have to confess that I am very interested. And it's great. Could you put your email in the chat again? We've got 36 people now, so we've got some new people who've joined. If you could put your email address in the chat as you coach around this, and you're able to train around this, and you're able to, hold a consultation. I hope that answers the question for people in Ghana. I think Yvonne Christie had a related question, so I'll let her ask it, and then I'm going to move over to my next guest, who is Nicole Joseph-Chin, who is our breast esteem lady. So Yvonne Christie, over to you.
Thanks. Anika, I just wanted to ask, because I'm a bit funny about gloves and plastic and rubber. Do they have to put a glove on? I mean, I understand it's health, blah, 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 da, 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 da. But I would just imagine there'd be some people like me who don't like that kind of material on their
Yes, I understand.
Personal bits. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do understand.
Like everybody's the same. Does it always have to be gloves, or as you get a relationship, and it is an relationship, that sometimes people can do it without the gloves, or is it always gloves? Is that all part of the training as well?
Yeah, it is part of it. It's it really does help separate it from sex. What I will say is, I am sensitive to latex.
Yeah.
And so always use natural or vinyl gloves. And then what you have to remember too is that it's a very light stroke. For someone like you, if you're sensitive to material, I would always suggest you use more lube. There's almost like an air stroke where the stroker is stroking the lube instead of your genitals, and you would be surprised by how much sensation is available there, just above and on the lube. And so there are ways around it. And I think you'd find that, a light stroke with a lot of lube would do the trick for you.
Yeah. It tends to be the after effect, really, not at the time. Do you know what I mean? It's then I tend to. Anyway, it's just interesting to know. I just thought I'd ask you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your
question. Very interesting. I'm with you, Yvonne W. I'm all for it. Oh, yeah.
Let's make it happen.
Our cards are on the table, baby. Let me now introduce the lovely Nicole Joseph-Chin, who is she's a fixture now. And what I love about Nicole is I'll introduce her anyway, and then I'll tell you what I like. So Nicole is described herself as a Trinbagonian social entrepreneur and founder of Miss Braffit, a Caribbean-born and globally recognized breast health solutions company. She has a wealth of knowledge as a women's health advocate with over 2 decades of global experience in social impact in the areas of women's rights, adolescent health, gender justice, and breast esteem. Nicole is an alumna of Cornell University, Oklahoma State, and is an awardee of fellowships from U.S. State Department, IVLP, Government of India, SCI, and High Force W. Anyway, what I like about Nicole is that she brings a whole fresh perspective to breasts. And anyone that's heard Nicole speak, she speaks, I mean, on many issues, all the issues we've discussed tonight, but her particular positioning of breasts is just quite phenomenal. It's just great. So Nicole, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the discussion tonight. And we're talking tonight, part 2, on sexual relationships and intimacy. And so you've been listening to the conversation, and yeah, I'd like you to add your take, your practice, you know, what work you do, what your views are even around intimacy and self-love.
Good evening and thank you. Good night, good morning, whoever's watching where. You know, thanks for having us. Thanks for having me particularly. We cannot speak about orgasms and pleasure and leave the upper part of the body out. And this is what happens all the time in sexual and reproductive health around the world. We leave half of the woman's body out or the person's body out. And then we try to figure out why is that sexual or that pleasurable experience not complete. And we also need to acknowledge inside of that space the women who have had challenges around issues such as a diagnosis with breast cancer and have had to remove a breast, or have had to have a lumpectomy, or where the nipples have been removed and there's no nipple sensation. What happens to her and what is her sexual and pleasurable experience? And sometimes, how does she even relate? Because, okay, we're not going to ever trivialize the genitalia because they're so critically important. But what we always acknowledge as well is the presence of the breast in the anatomy, because that's the first thing that you see essentially, regardless of the size, that identifies a gender or a person's actual frame. So when we're talking about the breasts, we have to look at their role inside of the sexual experience. Additionally, we have to look at how sometimes nipple arousal is critical to even what the orgasm or the orgasmic experience turns out to be. So in terms of the body parts that, you know, where we're stimulating and exciting and getting aroused, we have to look at the role that breasts play, and particularly when breasts are changing and the breast composition and the breast tissue is changing. Does that woman feel good about her body enough to want foreplay and any kind of arousal and activities to start in that region? Or does she want to move straight down to the genitalia? Or someone who is in the transitional state and is looking at doing chest surgery removal, are they going to have nipple sensation after? And how is that going to affect their actual sexual experience? So again, you know, when we talk about the body and the whole body exploration experience that Onika shared as well, you have to look at that wonderland experience. Some people are completely and totally aroused just by the breasts, that breast region only, and particularly, you know, for a longer period of time. So we really have to start talking about the whole person and asking the question, how important are breasts and nipple sensation and nipple arousal in that whole sexual experience?
Thank you so much. This is what I'm talking about, the breast. Another perspective. Let me see if there's anything in the chat to bring us up to, oh, okay. There's a bit of applause here. Can you talk on FGM and the impact on sexual pleasure? Ooh.
I have two questions, Yvonne.
Yeah, go on.
So one question was for Akeera. Can you say more about DIY condoms?
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, sure. So it depends on what kind of condom you need, but it's mostly, I know it's women who need like oral condoms, so what's known as dental dams. They sometimes use plastic bags. you cut it to fit around the vagina area or the clit area, so you can protect yourself from sexual oral STIs. You can also cut a regular condom. You can slice off the tip of the condom, and you can slice it vertically, and you can stretch it open, and that can also be a dental dam too. Some folks also cut the gloves, so regular latex gloves. You can cut it all the fingers parts off except the middle finger, and the middle finger can fit as replicating either a trans penis or a condom for those who may be wearing a strap-on, for example. So using gloves can also be helpful too. So you don't have to buy these materials. You can literally just make your own.
Oh, there you go.
They've got one. They have one more question. Yes, for Akeera. You mentioned polyamory, and they're asking, what is it?
Yes, so polyamory is for folks who are not in a traditional monogamous relationship. So they're open to having multiple, either romantic partners or sexual partners. And the reason I'm differentiating it is because sometimes you can have multiple partners, but it's not just for sexual reasons. So usually you have to have two consenting, let's say you're in a relationship with someone, and you decide to open up the relationship, your partner has to consent to having multiple partners involved too. But let's say you're single and you're dating, it's also about communicating with those that you're dating, that you're talking to other people, or you're sleeping with other people, especially if you're bringing other sexual partners into the mix. I'm also going to add that for poly folks right now, COVID is kind of throwing a wrench into the sexual experience, because that's another layer of having conversations and boundaries regarding, you know, if you're bringing multiple partners into the mix, you have to consider that is expanding your contact with multiple people who may have had exposure to COVID. So it's added a lot of different layers. But polyamory, also known as non-monogamous, are people who are not in non-monogamous relationship settings.
Thank you. And I think, was Jada Pinkett Smith's daughter called? They announced on the red table that her daughter announced that she's polyamorous. I think Willow, thank you. Willow has said she's polyamorous. I think there's some honesty around it, which I kind of like, the fact that it's consensual. Polyamory. But Anika, did you want to say something?
Like, I can share, I can add, once again, from my experience. I actually have, I had two couples in my practice who, one couple, I took them through that process of opening up their relationship and negotiating what polyamory would look for them. And I'm also currently doing that with another couple in my practice. And so it takes, if you've started off in non-monogamy and you grew up thinking this is the only way, or the only sanctioned way, or the only proper way, there takes a bit of mental reframing to get people to recognize that there is no one size fits all. And there is no need to moralize over what works for people if they're happy and it's consensual and they're negotiating it. In fact, for the couples that I have worked with, they have said that this entire process has brought them closer together. Because to get to that point where you're open and honest on a very deep level and very vulnerable when it comes to your sexuality, it means developing a deeper understanding of each other and a deeper trust. Better communication, and that entire process really brings them closer together. Of course, you've got to work on all the issues you had with it before. Are you going to disclose to friends and family or not? If you have children, how are you going to deal with this and talk to your children when they get of age? So it's not simply, hey, we just want to have multiple partners. It is managing the emotions that come with that. I mean, I tell people, it's probably not something for me because I find one human being in a partnership is enough. And so if you're going to be managing multiple lovers, it also means managing all of the emotional issues that come with that, managing your time, deciding on what the boundaries are. Are you going to know each other? Are you going to all be out in public together? Or is it that it's always a very secretive or protective kind of liaisons that are happening. Is everybody going to make sure that they're tested? Safer sex. There's a lot to negotiate, but it can be done successfully. It can be done well. And in fact, it suits more people. It suits some people better than monogamy. And that, I think that's a fact that some of us are uncomfortable with, especially if you come from a particular religious background. And of course, within polyamory, there's so many different arrangements to have. You can have a situation where, let's say it's a heterosexual couple, husband and wife, and the husband, he's like, no, I'm good with just you, but you can go find people. So he is monogamous with her, his wife, but she has other partners because he doesn't satisfy her sexually, and he has no issue with jealousy. And what she has with these other partners are simply sexual relationships, and there isn't really a big emotional tie, and she doesn't go on dates to them or anything like that. It's simply they exist because he has probably little to no sex drive or no interest, and he doesn't have an issue with jealousy. And you could have other arrangements where they both have other partners that know each other. In some cases, no, I don't want to know who it is. Just be safe and be discreet, and I good. So there are many, many ways and arrangements that exist within it. And as a coach and counselor, I help couples negotiate what works best for that dynamic. So it is happening, and it can work well. And I know couples who do it well.
Mm. Yeah, I must say I've been quite fascinated to watch films and documentaries of polyamorous families. People who actually everybody sleeps in the bed together, and some of the challenges. Because I too think about the emotional impact of it all, but it's something that quite fascinates me. Nicole wanted to say something of breast esteem. Nicole, what were you saying?
Actually, no, I was just adding to the polyamorous discussion and saying that now, at this moment, besides the fact that it's now so very prevalent in the news, there have also been so many discussions and particularly research papers and academic papers around mental health and the polyamorous relationship. So I was just jumping in to add that from that perspective of the trending hashtag right now.
Oh, mental health.
I'm going to jump in quickly here as well.
Yeah.
It's trending now in the Western world, but this has been an option for all kinds of cultures all around the world
That's true.
Ever since mankind has existed. So this is a thing for the post-Christian Western space that they're now looking at. And I thank Nicole for bringing up breasts and talking about the importance of addressing that part of the body. And I also want to include the breasts of men. So when I do my body that pleasure mapping, men discover, oh, I've got an erogenous zone there too. Because breasts aren't erogenous zones except for women. But when we do that exploration, that full exploration, many men discover that they are also sexually aroused there. They find that area a part of their body that brings them much pleasure. So definitely include the entire body. There's some people who can reach orgasm with breast stimulation alone, no penetration, you don't even have to touch anywhere else. And some people just breathing alone can bring about orgasm. So the body really is a wonderland.
Maureen is saying men's nipples. Yeah, men like their nipples suck, Maureen, in case you didn't know. They love it. Well, most of the men I've been with love it. Hey ho. But yeah, I think they're neglected, aren't they, in that sense? Anyway.
Can I jump in on the poly talk?
Yes, absolutely. Please
because
do.
it's one of my favorite things. And I think
oh yes, go on.
Yeah, obviously, because if when I was talking about, you can ask multiple partners to own, it's like a very gentle kind of introduction to what that might be like. But one of the things that I was very interested in is like listening to everyone speak, this notion that it may be like emotionally exhausting to have like multiple partners, especially if it's more than two. But I think that part of the hardwiring, especially initially, is that people come to polyamory with a monogamous mindset. Right. So this idea that you're actually taking on a full, like a full on other partner. And I mean, I liked what Anika said, that, there are different setups. And one of the things that I like about what I teach, what I like about OM, is that you discover what are the fundamentals of connection, so that you can have like an hour-long container with someone, an intimacy container, and feel really full and nurtured, and go on with the rest of your week without having to listen to their problems, without needing to rescue them. It's like you get to experience full on connection without all the extras. It's like in my life, I have people, especially because let me be honest. So I'm poly, and I have, because of the pandemic, like a lot of my relationships have become quite virtual. There's someone that I'm reading a book with, just a book. We talk every week for an hour. During the week, we're reading the book and we leave each other voice notes about, like what we've read and what it's, how it's made a difference to us. You would be surprised by how erotic this could be because of the nature of the book. It's like, so, you discover, connection is in the communication. Connection is in sharing something together that we're both enjoying reading, and I've got like different containers, different people, and I'm always blown away, though I know it to be true, that connection is like the result, and it's not a formula. I don't want you to think, throw in some honesty, throw in some authenticity, a little bit of your desire, and it's all cooked. It is different strokes for different folks. But that's the beautiful thing. It's like you get to enjoy people almost like different flavors, right? So the people that I own with, the people that I read books with, the people that I go for walks in the park with a mask with, so it's like, you discover that connection is a very broad thing. And no, you don't have to have an extra husband or an extra wife to be poly.
Yeah.
I've been educated then. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I appreciate you bringing that perspective. Someone once explained how they view poly as like we're all poly in our own ways because we all have multiple relationships, right? We have our relationships with our friends, we have our relationship with our families, we're romantic relationships, and so it's deep, intimate connections with different people, but we just put a word on it and it's called poly. And yeah, there are definitely different levels to it. The other thing I was going to say to Onika is, I think for queer folks, we understand how the full body is needed, right? Like we're all about foreplay and not necessarily just about penetration sex. And so it's interesting sometimes to hear how heterosexual people forget that men have, tits too and nipples too. And like, that is a part of how queer folks have sex. Like we're exploring the full body and having intimacy with every part of the body too, like sucking toes and fingers. Like that is also erotic play in itself too.
Very true. Very true. That's very true. Okay. Are there any? We're coming to the close of our event almost. So I'm going to ask my speakers to think about their final comments, if you like. Yansie, is there anything you want to say at this point?
Well, someone has said a question. Could you tell people stop questioning me on my phone?
This is incredible. It's like we've got two things running simultaneously here.
I know. Talk about the implications of watching too much porn.
Oh, yes, because remember I was talking about last time, I was talking about how these kids are growing up thinking that pum pum comes without hair. Okay, anybody want to respond to the question of, what did you say, Yansie, the implication of watching? Is that an implication for just adults watching? There's so much things.
That was just the question. Implications of watching too much porn.
Yes, it has so many different impacts, but I'll leave it to the experts. Something I looked at a lot a few years ago. But I'll leave it to the experts to respond to that. Anybody want to bite? Onika? What did the impact? Yes, I think you spoke on this last time, didn't you? The impact of watching too much porn.
So, but I want to bite right after that comment you just said about boys thinking that the pum pum has no hair.
Oh yes, that's right. Yes, you did some work.
Yeah. So some years ago when I worked at the HIV Secretariat before I got into sexology, that is literally a few cases that we had. I mean, literally, I have met young boys whose sex education came completely from porn, and therefore when they got into sex in real life, everything they saw is what they thought would happen in real life, right? So I guess they figured all women are, we all gymnastics and we can contort our bodies in all kinds of positions, and genitals have no hair, and men could go on and on and on and on and on and on for many, for long periods of time, and women always make those songs. So it really is very, very poor sex education. And so too much porn really is a subjective thing. It's too much for an individual if it begins to interfere in their lifestyle if they begin to spend a whole lot of money on it while sacrificing other important things in their life. So once it gets to the point where it begins to interfere with regular life, when it begins to become a problem and cause problems in other areas of your life, you probably have a compulsion that you need to see a therapist about. And so there are many inaccurate perceptions or beliefs that come out of watching porn. And so there's something that we teach, we as in sex educators, because I'm also a sex educator, in our field. It's called porn literacy. That's a thing. And so we teach people about what porn is. One, it's fiction. Fiction. There is a script that these people follow. So there's nothing in there that's real. And no man can keep a hard on for that length of time, really, especially under hot lights and a camera all up in your crevices. They take breaks and they drink water and then they come back again, and then women have to go get lubricated and come back again, because nobody ain't staying wet that long with that same, boring kind of stroke. And even the noises that they make are scripted. So you use your vowels, A, E, I, O, U. So it's and all the sounds for each letter from the vowel. So even that is scripted. It's complete fiction. And it may also give people a particular idea or perception of how we're supposed to perform, or that sex is performed. And there's hardly any negotiation around safer sex and wearing condoms and were you tested, so it does not give a very realistic, doesn't give a realistic view at all of what sex within real people are. People lose erections, you might fall off the bed, you might hit your head. You're like, oh my gosh, that position is uncomfortable. But there is such a thing as ethical porn or feminist porn. It's not easily accessible, so you have to find it, and you probably have to pay for it, because the producers and the actors in ethical porn, for one, they work on the scripting together. It is filmed in a way that is ethical, and you're paying these actors well, and the actors are usually people who may know each other or who are couples in real life. And accidents happen, or people lose their erection, they laugh and they giggle, in ethical porn. And so it gives a more realistic idea of what happens between people in a sexual encounter. And there are older folks as well. So you may see senior citizens have an ethical porn or feminist porn. Yeah. So if you find yourself some good porn, has those principles where it is realistic, the actors are properly, they're treated well, the scenes and the scenarios feel authentic, the people actually want to be together, or they want to have sex with each other, and they're not doing anything that the director is forcing upon them, but they've negotiated what's going to happen in the sex scene. That's a lot healthier to look at, because it is real, and you will see negotiation around safer sex. You will see men and women treating each other with respect. You will see the negotiation for what you want and for what I want, that kind of thing. And yes, it gives men a false confidence. I'm reading somebody's comment here. False confidence that they can perform the same way. Yeah, it's fiction. It's a movie. It really is not real at all. At all. So yes, I hope that was comprehensive.
Thank you. Is anybody on the panel can speak to the, thank you so much for that, Onika. Is there anybody on the panel who can speak to the issue of overconsumption, addiction, porn addiction, and the impact of porn addiction on a person?
I'll say it's sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go first. I don't mind.
No, I was just going to say it's something that I see in my practice as a therapist many times, and the cause of friction in relationships, and there are a number of reasons, and there are a number of ways of engagement, because it all depends on the root of it. Where does it come from? And it's not necessarily that the man may be in a heterosexual relationship, that the man is the overconsumer. There are also instances where it's the woman.
Yeah,
and I've had one, the last couple that I dealt with in that situation, the woman was obsessed really with body perfection. So that was why she was binging on the porn, because she was using it to try and mirror the behaviors, the way the body looked. And so she was using it as her benchmark in that case. But I'm saying that was a kind of extreme. But in many instances, it's the cause of disruption within relationships, but there are also deep-seated issues where it comes from. So the porn is just almost the surface.
Yes.
But there's more to the relationship than that.
And in some cases, it can create underperformance, isn't it? In people,
absolutely,
things like that.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say. Like in my world, that some of the men that come to the practice of Om, they've begun to discover that it's difficult to get turned on sexually with women because they're they become so addicted to pornography, and so that kind of relearning what it's like to be in their body one stroke at a time is really useful for them, like reconnecting with the actual human, reconnecting with the actual female genitals. And then also that there are women who, in trying, just like what Yansie just said, in trying to replicate what they've seen in pornography, they literally like numb their own genitals, because what's happening is like they're doing things that they don't want to do, that are not resonant with their own desires and likes. And as a result, it's like that area is like, we say frozen just to give you, or numb, just to give you an idea of like, just being unable to feel anymore what's actually their own thing. And so again, one stroke at a time, discovering what's the kind of stroke I like, how much pressure does my genitals enjoy, what length of stroke does my genitals enjoy. And so that's how it shows up in my world.
Thank you so much. I hope that's answered the question for the questioner, but yes, it's a complex issue. Okay, we're drawing to the close, and so I'm going to ask you for closing comments. We're getting feedback. It's a brilliant evening of gaining knowledge. Thank you, panel. So we're getting thanks. Who would like to say a closing remark? I won't. Anika, Akeera, is there anything you'd like to say in your closing around the topic? Anything you want to leave our audience with? We've still got 33 people in the room.
Yeah, sure. First, thank you for having me, and I hope everyone took something away from this conversation. I definitely learned a lot too from some of the new practices I'm learning about. I think for me, I would really stress and encourage people to get to know themselves outside of what may be stereotypical and what's accepted, right? So a part of people come into their identities of whether it's queerness or transness, it's a part of like rediscovering who they truly are outside of the expectations of society. So definitely tune in inward to figure out what you're attracted to, what you're into, and figuring out how to really stay authentic to yourself and your body and your own needs and wants. And engage with people that's like-minded too, right? So there's communities of folks out there. I know Anika talked about the OM community. There's the LGBT community, right? People are interested in supporting you in whatever sexual pleasures or journey that you may be on. So I'll leave it with just being authentic to yourself and your wants and needs.
Thank you very much. Can I then ask Nicole Joseph, what would you like the audience to take away from today?
Continuous discussion around self-love and self-care, and particularly looking at the whole body. Looking at the whole body of whatever gender representation we have, and ensuring that it continues to be part of our total conversation.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Okay, so Aneka Theolade.
Thank you. It's been awesome to be here. It's been, just lovely to be, around kind of like similar faces and, talk to people with similar voices. That's rare. Like in my world, people do look very different often. Yeah, I think, one of my favorite essays is by Audre Lorde. It's called Uses of the Erotic. And I would suggest to everyone on the call, it's available very freely online, Uses of the Erotic. And I think that especially for women of color, there is an underestimation of pleasure, firstly. I mean, if you get into Audre's, essay, the erotic is way beyond simple sensation, right? It's like it's a form of power. And, I would love, my whole quest is for Black women to know that pleasure is power. It is like, oh, I'm getting goosebumps. It is an act of resistance in the face of colonialism and slavery to have a life in which you prioritize your pleasure, in which for 15 minutes a day, you allow someone to stroke your genitals. For 15 minutes a day, you allow yourself to just slow down and enjoy something. It doesn't have to be your genitals. Enjoy a cup of tea, something that, really turns you on. And I can't impress at a point. It's a game changer. Your life changes when, instead of like being stressed out and focused on, what's coming next and am I going to make it? What am I going to achieve? And it becomes about that subtle in the moment, what makes me happy? Everything changes. You begin to love yourself. Your connections are better, and so that's what I want to leave people with. Please read Uses of the Erotic and begin to prioritize your pleasure 15 minutes a day. Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you so much. And let me just, Lord, Lorde, just put it in the chat. Okay, so Onika, what's your final takeaway? What would you like people to take away from today?
So I am hoping people begin to see and understand that the erotic and the sexual energy can also be healing energy, that it is essentially a part of who you are and a largely ignored aspect of our self-care. So begin to expand your understanding of how you can use your sexual energy, how you can use your erotic energy. Begin to think of pleasure, something that you seek daily. And find ways to connect. Community is really important. Find ways to connect with other persons who think like you, who understand the importance of erotic and sexual energy in an ethical way, in a way that empowers, in a way that uplifts you, in a way that contributes to your sense of well-being and healing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, Professor Dr. Yansie.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's about knowing who you are, take time, know yourself, know what turns you on, spend time. How do you see yourself, in those moments behind closed doors when the curtains are drawn and you feel nice? Who are you in that moment? What makes your heart sing? What makes you feel happy and tingly and, those wonderful sensations? And enjoy more of that. Do more of that. We have these misconceptions from society and all these stigmas and taboos in society, but it is about you. Be comfortable with you and nourish yourself with love. Give yourself love and be open to receiving love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a brilliant takeaway. Yeah. Self-love and be open to giving and receiving love. Yeah, love. My favorite quote, my own personal quote, is love is right action every time. If we're not operating from a place of love, then we're not operating from a good place. Okay, so I think I'd like to thank all our participants for staying with us throughout the time. I would love to thank our speakers who have just, again, totally enriched the event with their knowledge, their deep knowledge and professionalism and experience. It's just so enriching to hear from people who've got so much skin in the game, as they say. My wing person, Nicole Peterson, thank you so much for holding this thing together. She's my wing lady, Nicole. And if there's nothing else, Brian Q, thank you for being our technical person tonight. Much appreciated. And I'd just like to thank everybody for being here and to say what a pleasure it is again to host and to learn, because I'm always learning too. So with that, I'll say good night and thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Bye-bye.